Our scripture of the morning is taken the first book of Peter, chapter 1, verses 1 and 7. Wives likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives. And verse 7, husbands likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. We find here that wives are given two pieces of counsel. First of all, to be submissive to their own husbands, something which is not popular nowadays, especially in this modern culture where everybody wants to be independent and the wives don't think they ought to be submissive to husbands. And secondly, that they are to be witnesses to the husbands. Many times husbands are disinclined to be religious, or you might call it, or spiritual, and the wife is the one that goes to church and is more spiritual in the relationship. It's not as God would have it. But when that situation occurs, by their conduct, wives can be a positive influence for the husbands. And the husbands are counseled to give honor to the wives, something they don't always do. And secondly, it's indicated in the text here that if they're not, don't do so, that their prayers may be hindered, that God's blessings are not going to come to them. One observation to be made is that no matter where you go, you will be with yourself. You can go through all sorts of experiences and all sorts of places, but at the end of the run, wherever it is, wherever you go, you're going to end up with yourself. So you should be thoughtful about what kind of person you are. The title of our message today is A Guy's Guide to Marriage, 10 Hints. 10 Hints. In Proverbs we're counseled, life and death are in the power of the tongue. And certainly there's a lot of power in our speech. You want to use that positively, and especially in the home. It may be difficult for us at times to think before we speak, to speak in a loving and kind manner as we ought to, but if we don't, it'll have very negative effects. Sometimes guys may feel that their wives are just too talkative. Women do tend to talk more than men. It's actually wired into people's brains for women to be more verbose. But gentlemen, if you think having a wife that talks too much is the worst thing possible, wait until she stops. The silent treatment is absolutely awful. So think about that. Guys and gals tend to talk in different manners. Guys engage what some analysts call report talk. That is, it's focused on information, it's objective, it's practical, it's about things. Whereas women engage in what's called rapport talk. That is, it's about relationships, emotions, engaging with other people. It's about how things happen with the people as opposed to what happens with the things. And guys tend to take an attitude toward relationships and life as a whole of fixing things. They come at it with, how can this thing be solved, fixed, repaired? Whereas the gal many times just wants to be listened to. And she doesn't want to be fixed. She doesn't want to be viewed as a problem, but rather as a person to be concerned about and loved. So, gentlemen, we need to look like we're paying attention. If we're not paying attention and don't look like it, it's going to get a negative response. So we need to be cautious about that. We may tend to look at a wife as, okay, maybe not a math problem, but an algebra problem, a little higher level, more complicated. It's still not a good way, gentlemen. It's better to look at women as a wonder to be enjoyed. Mysterious, confusing at times, difficult, but thank God for that. That's how He made them. We need to learn to adjust to that. And remember, when times get tough, getting loud and harsh is not going to make for a good relationship. It won't be smooth, and it won't lead to things happening around the house, domestic duties being performed nicely. That's good. The wise man, the Bible said, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So we need to be soft and loving and kind, even if we're annoyed and irritated, which easily happens in relationships. One sage observed, if words are closed for our thoughts, are we not thinking? In order to think, we use thoughts. Some sort of mental concept is being expressed in a language of some sort. Different languages for different people, but nevertheless the we conceive of them in our heads as words, and then we express our thoughts in words. So if our language is very limited, harsh, and coarse, maybe so is our thinking. We need to improve the level of our thinking. Sometimes our conversations, especially if we're tired and annoyed, can be just degenerate into just one-word conversations. Yeah, maybe, yeah. Things like that. Typical when people are tired and don't really want to be bothered and annoyed. And it may be true for both him and her, because both of you have worked, you've come home, but you're probably expecting her to put on a dinner, and that's another task for her to do. And you've been annoyed, she's been annoyed, so conversation breaks down. It just doesn't happen too much. That's not a characteristic of a good relationship. A good relationship is conversation, more than one word. Another observation made between men and women is that along this line, that we are human beings, not doings. Where guys tend to look at getting things done, accomplishing things, doing. Where gals take a being attitude toward life. Why do it? How do you feel about it? There's a contrast there which we should understand and appreciate. And when we talk, we don't want to be accusing one another. Lectures and accusations don't go well. It just stirs up negativity. And always and never are ways to shut down conversation as opposed to allowing for other possibilities, more questions and fewer answers. Yes, guys, fewer answers may come across better with her because she doesn't want to be viewed as a problem to be solved. Just listen to her. Sometimes we have to ask because, gentlemen, we just don't understand women as much as we'd like to much of the time. We have to ask more of what, less of what. And listen, when we speak, sometimes we say things that are hurtful and we don't realize it. We don't hear what we say. So we should make a special effort to say things that are nice, that are complimentary. And sometimes just repeating back. I find that problem at times, especially on cell phone conversations. The whole conversation doesn't come through, and sometimes I have to repeat back, this is what I heard, is this what you said? Which leads to clarification and better understanding. Remember, winning the argument is not important as winning her heart. You may win the argument, but you've PO'd her. You've made her angry or annoyed. That's haven't accomplished anything, gentlemen, so we want to avoid that. When we grow up, we tend to learn from our families and our home relationships how to deal with differences. And certainly in families there are occasions for differences. But how we deal with them is very important. Some people talk and some people fight. Fighting is not good for a marriage. You end up with winners and losers. Well, there's no such thing as a winner. If you've won and the other person's lost, you've got a bad relationship at home, which you're going to have to live with. Some people deal with problems and irritations as they come along, and other people, let's let them build up, and finally there's a little spark or something, and then there's an explosion. It blows up. Not good. You may have probably learned this from your family, but you may have to relearn something new, something different, in order to improve your family or your marital relationships. Remember, your wife or your husband is a long-term, lifelong partner, not a short-term combatant. You're not in it, just to have a sparring match. It's not like a debate, which you may have in high school or in some situation. Not that at all. There's no winners and losers. Your partner's working together toward a smooth daily relationship, and ultimately will continue into the kingdom. There are different styles that people have with when they have the differences they're trying to work out. Sometimes people get into the blaming game. Well, blaming just makes the other person a loser, and it shuts down conversation. You can't re-engage because you've demonized the other person. Sometimes people make demands, and then they don't get their demands, they back up and withdraw. Or they criticize the other person, which puts them on the defensive, and you're on the offensive. You may end up in a tit-for-tat kind of situation where that might be called the protest polka. It's not a pleasant dance. Some people freeze up or run away. Again, if you're running away from each other, you're not having a loving, close relationship. people have different kinds of personalities, and some are more complementary to one another. For example, it's often said that Irish and Italians are both hot-headed. Well, if you have this pair marrying, there may be a lot of sparks and a lot of friction going on because of the way they tend to deal with differences and communicate. But a marital couple is only one team. They're on the same side. They're not enemies, and if they act like it, they won't get along well. One needs to deal with the facts and the feelings. The guys are probably going to focus more on the facts and the gals on the feelings, but we need to understand the other person so we can work together. And also, we need rest. If we're not properly rested and if we're all stressed out, we're going to be irritable and touchy, and things will respond to things out of proportion, which will lead to strong words and hot words, and again, we're not getting along. And we grow. We should grow in life. We enter a marital relationship at some point or level in our life. Hopefully you don't stagnate from then. If we stagnate and never grow, there's nothing new in our lives. Our experiences and what we learn or what we're interested in, we become dull partners. We're not very interesting to the other person. We're easily tempted to give attention to something new or different on the outside of our home life, which can be problematic and will lead to long-term problems when that other person seems so they're new, they're interesting, they're vibrant. At home, and everything's dull and stale. The solution to that is to grow yourself, to stoke an interest, read, or get some new friends. Friends can be not necessarily just for recreation, it could be along the business line or spiritual. Friends can help us to grow our hearts, develop more empathy by helping us understand how we're perceived and how we relate to others. So pay attention to your emotions. That's something that guys tend not to do terribly well. And grow spiritually. Find your faith pathway, something which we talked about recently at Overbrook. As we go into adulthood, there are 5 common steps. Leaving home, completing one's education, then starting work, oftentimes becoming married, and getting married and becoming a parent. Hopefully reasonably close in this order. But along the way here, as the families develop, many times, particularly in the inner city here, there's a lack of dads. The dads aren't home, maybe they never were, and those that are may not be good examples. And again, in our culture here, many people don't value work. They're just looking for a paycheck, an income, some way to get by, sometimes through illicit occupations. That's not as God intended it. God put Adam in the garden to work, and gentlemen, we're expected to work, not lean on women and let them carry the weight. But there are guys that do this, and there are women that let them get away with it, perhaps because there are so few decent guys around. If you work hard, then leisure can be experienced as a blessing, as opposed to something you do much of most days because you aren't working very hard. If you work hard, you can rest well. The words of God to Adam about Adam in the Garden of Eden were he took the man and put him in the garden to tend and keep it. That was the duty given to Adam and to his progeny, which includes us. We are intended to work, not to sit around and be idle. So the work for Adam included cultivating, taking what was there in the garden, the plants, and making them better. The plants needed trimming and pruning and directing. The vines needed to be kept under control. Adam had some sort of vision about what the garden would look like afterwards he attended it. We likewise should have some vision as to what we're trying to accomplish when we work and do things. We may be probably working with other kind of materials, maybe pen, paper, spreadsheets, lumber, concrete to pour a sidewalk, various materials and various objects we work with. But we should have a vision of some sort where we're trying to go and do with it. In our modern culture, people have gotten away from cultivating, from making things and doing things with their hands. We become very encouraged by our economy and culture to be consumers, to be buying things, accumulating things. Now, guys are expected to provide for the family, but life's not about piling up stuff in the garage or the storage unit that we purchased and really don't need. And trying to accomplish this may lead us to putting too much focus on work. We just want to make more money and become slaves to our jobs. That's not God's will. We need to rest. Remember the Sabbath. God took a break on the seventh day of creation week. We need to take a rest. Because if we're beat, you can't give your best. Not your family, and you're not showing respect to God either. A lot of people end up just rushing and being hurried all the time in life, which is not good. You raise your blood pressure, you shorten your life, you get ulcers, and people actually encourage this by consuming a lot of caffeine, and they have nowadays our smartphones are with us into the restroom and just about every place else. People don't get a break. Constantly communicating, with other people and being interrupted, and trying to keep up with what's going on in the world and the latest events. You don't get a rest that way. The Sabbath is a day when we leave things behind that can wait, like house chores or car maintenance, the necessary items we should take care of before the Sabbath hours, and the other ones, let them wait. We can plan ahead for that. And then on the Sabbath, we can enjoy fellowship with our family and friends. Worship. Remember our Creator. God did the work, and He gives grace. Our job is to receive that grace, not perform and do a bunch of stuff, trying to please Him because of our works. So get away from the media and the phone on the Sabbath. Get close to your spouse, and relax. There is an alternative. You're going to be burned out. Always rush. You'll probably be ill. Your relationships will be poor. You'll be spiritually alienated, tired, and cranky if you don't take a rest. Slow down. One sage said, to love is bliss, to serve is divine. In other words, service is actually on a higher level. Something we don't like to think about now is service. We think of that as something for slaves and people in menial positions. Not something we want to do. Back in the Archie Bunker days, husbands worked and wives served because wives pretty much didn't work outside the home. Guys can overdo it and be run down and exhausted, but you can also treat your wife that way, and she may be run down and exhausted because she's been working all day. Her service should be appreciated. Women do things around the home, in most cases, that should be appreciated. And they like a little bit of quality time and some attention. Thoughtful gifts work in some relationships, and acts of service. Do things for her, not just expect her to do things for you all the time. And loving touch. That doesn't mean, sex, just touch. There's a lot of stress that people experience in life, which makes us naturally want to. All right. Submission is a word which is not popular in our modern society, but it's not a bad word. Submission is not only for slaves, and wives are not slaves. Submission is an attitude we should have toward one another, of doing things to please, to serve. Remember, Jesus said the last will be first and the first last. He also said, whoever will be great among you must be your servant, and whoever will be first among you must be your slave. He doesn't mean slave in the sense like we had it here in the United States, but rather doing for others, as opposed to being waited on. That's the attitude that Christians should have, that we serve others, and in so doing, God values us. He recognizes our willingness to be humble, to obedient, which is an attitude that He likes, it pleases Him, so we should be striving to exhibit this kind of behavior. Pride is an attitude that infects many people. C.S. Lewis said about it, pride gets no pleasure from having something, only on having it more than the next person. In other words, it's a comparison thing. The pleasure of being above the rest, or having more than them, or stepping over everyone around you. It's not good that we want to demean other people or be greater than them or exalt themselves. This is the opposite of the humility and servant leadership that Christ wants to see from us. So as we told in Ephesians, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Remember, the team is first, not the player. Men and women have equal dignity before God, but they do not have equal roles. That's not what the pattern the Bible gives us. So we need to respect one another and listen. And gentlemen, sometimes she may know something more about something you do, so listen. Maybe there's another reason, or sometimes just do it her way to keep her happy. Don't be a know-it-all. Your way is the only way. That's not good for relationships. You may remember the Lakers, a great basketball team of years ago with Kobe Bryant, Shaq O'Neal. Both of them were star players. They wanted the limelight. They wanted to be seen and heard. They racked up lots of points, and they were on the same. They were on the same team, but they didn't work with one another like they were. They're competing. Instead of focusing their competitive energies on the opponents, they focused them on each other, which did not help the team and may have cost them some championships. You probably pursued your wife, so keep chasing her. Remember, she was very desirable, at least at one point. You may not perceive her as being so much now because we age and we grow and sometimes our waistlines swell a little bit, etc. But still keep chasing her. Let her know that you love her, you care for her, you prefer her. Keep up the romance. Remember, wedding day is not a finish line. It's really the beginning of a marathon. So appreciate her for who she is, and not just what she does. Don't let her feel taken for granted, that she may respond by withdrawing, seeking attention, getting bitter and angry. And after a while, she might start to have doubts about you and your marriage because there's no appreciation. And she may start being readily attracted to other guys. You don't want that. So take some initiative, ask her out, let her know she's a priority, and show her some manners, some respect, chivalry. And get physical, not just sex. Ask her about that. It's hard to know what women want sometimes. You just straight out have to ask them and get some feedback. And mentally stimulate each other. Talk about something new or different. Share your feelings and emotions. Women are into this, guys. And be the spiritual leader in the home. Oftentimes, it's the woman who leads, but God wants us to lead, men to lead. So don't be afraid to do what God wants you to do, to worship, to pray. Augustine said, "Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in thee." We need to worship. We're here to represent the best interests of our Creator, to defend and promote God's program for the world. Well, we're ambassadors. You do what the one who sent you wants you to do. It's not what you like, it's what He likes that dictates your behavior and what you express. And God is God-centered, and that's all right because He's the Creator. But are we God-centered, or are we thinking about ourselves? For whose glory do we do things? Is our view really God's view? Maybe we're have a different viewpoint and we're expressing that and really working against God's program instead of for Him as He wants us to. When we have ourselves as a God, which unfortunately is true for many people, we may have an envious attitude which says, life owes me. A guilty attitude which says, I owe you. Greed says, I owe me. And then we get angry and we take the attitude, you, or that could be other people, could be God, owe me. The resulting situation is one of debt and debtors. Well, who wants to be in debt? Who wants to be a debtor or collecting debts? It's not a pleasant situation, so we need to get self off a throne and avoid this type of thinking. When you look at yourself and ask the question, where do I spend my time, my talent, and my treasure? You can find out who you're worshiping, whether it's truly God or perhaps someone else. Who gets it? Worship, the English word, goes back to some in the roots to the meaning, what's most worthy? What is most worthy? God, the Creator. It's not us. When we have something else that we're worshiping, we have an idol. It's misplaced worship when something else gets what God you get from you. It could be a person, a place, or a thing. Those things could be like success. We want to be our jobs to be successful, our business to be successful, which is okay, but it's not, that shouldn't be the priority in our life. Our relationships. Are we having a godly relationship with our, at home as well as with our friends and family? Or perhaps we're looking for the limelight and we want to be in society pages, have our page, as the song says it, on the cover of the Rolling Stone. Or we may be obsessed with our possessions. We want that big house in the suburbs with a 4-car garage and expensive cars in each slot and all sorts of possessions. But you can't take them with you, friend, and they're not but of so much use here in this life. And if you're doing that, you're probably cutting God short. You're not returning to him what is his. Or it could be your family. If we do have obligations to our family, want to love them and care for them, support them. But perhaps we're too much into them and neglecting God. Or your family members could be leading you away from God and you need to resist that. Or it could be a reputation. You want to be the big guy, be seen. All sorts of idols that we can have in life. We need to avoid these. In Ephesians we're counseled, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no man ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, of his bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. So we see here a parallel being drawn between the relationship that Jesus Christ has with the church and a husband to his wife. Jesus, of course, is the spiritual leader, and the husbands are to be the spiritual leaders in their families. That's the way God intended it. We see here that Jesus was the groom who pursued the bride, which is his people or church. He sacrificed his life for his bride. He led in forgiveness of his bride, and is committed to bringing out the beauty of his bride. Gentlemen, this is a tall order looking at Jesus Christ, to how he lived and how we should strive to emulate in our relationships. But we need to think about it. Lead worship, gentlemen, towards God. Remember that Jesus was a perfect husband. If we emulate him, we're going to have happy marriages. The results will be submission without domination, love without manipulation, sanctification without impatience, oneness without codependence, separation without abandonment, happiness without isolation. Marriage started out with one husband, one wife, showing the image of God to the world. A world that was perfect before sin entered into it. We want to continue the original mission, showing the world what perfect marriages look like and enjoying them ourselves by emulating Christ. So have we learned anything about our marriages today? Do you see anything you might want to try out? Are you team players playing together? Or are you acting like prima donnas, putting self first, putting the other person down, just wanting to be served but not serving? You need to think about practicing service, gentlemen.